Good morning, students. Today we are going to see fourth module, first chapter, that is IEEE 802.11 Wireless LAN Security. So in this we are going to see how we can provide a security to the wireless devices. For example, it's a mobile. The communication takes place between the two devices, or it's a Wi-Fi. By making use of a Wi-Fi, how we can provide a security. So these are the points we are going to see in this chapter. So the contents which we are going to see in today's presentation is a background, authentication, confidentiality and integrity. So before studying a background, we'll see some introduction part, that is wireless networks present formidable challenges in the area of security. The open nature of such networks makes it relatively easy to sniff packets or even modify and inject malicious packets into the network. The ease with which such attacks are launched necessitates careful design and deployment of security protocols for wireless networks. So what they have told is that here, so when the data transfer takes place in this wireless networks, so we have to be very careful because it is relatively easy to sniff packets or even modify and inject the malicious packets into the network by an attacker. So we need to provide such a protocol so that we can secure the communication. So in the background, there are two types of networks. First we will see first one is a wired network, another is a wireless LAN. So in the wired network, in many organizations, the wired network is an Ethernet LAN, that is local area network, with an existing security infrastructure which includes an authentication server. The main functionality, that is authentication, authorization and accounting, which we call it as a AAA functionality, is often provided by a server called as a Radius server, stands for Remote Authentication Dial-in User Service. So this Radius server is going to provide these three functionalities, and this Ethernet LAN is going to include an authentication server so as to authenticate the client. So in the wireless LANs, there are two principal types of WLANs. One we call it as the ad hoc networks, where stations, possibly nothing but the mobiles, communicate directly with each other. So there is another type of a WLAN which we call it as an infrastructure LAN, where it uses an access point to have a communication between the two devices. So we'll see this one, infrastructure WLAN, with a figure. So here you can say there are two networks. One is covered with access point 1, another with access point 2. So when the access point, that is AP, we are going to use a short form called as the AP. So it want to have a communication, then it frames a packet, sends it to the access point, then through this Radius server it will be sent to the another access point, and then it will be delivered to the destination. So this is what exactly the communication takes place between this infrastructure WLAN. We'll see this one. A first station sends a frame to an access point, then the access point then delivers to its final destination. So the destination may be the another wireless station, or it may be a station on the wired network that the AP is connected to. Thus, the AP serves as a bridge between the WLAN and the existing wired network. The challenge then is to develop protocols that seamlessly integrate the WLAN with the security infrastructure of the wired network. So here the security infrastructure of a wired network is a different, and security infrastructure of a WLAN is a different. So they need to integrate with each other so that the frame which can be sent by the sender, it is delivered to the destination by incorporating the security infrastructure of both wireless LAN and as well as wired network. A network of wireless stations which is associated with an access point is referred as basic service set. Such a network may be adequate for a home or a small enterprise. The union of the basic service sets comprises an extended service set. Each station and access point in the extended service set is uniquely identified by a MAC address, which is a 48-bit quantity. Each access point is also identified by an service set ID called as SSID, which is a character string of length at most 32 characters. A wireless station on power up needs to first discover an AP within its reach. A station that wishes to associate with an AP sends it an associate request frame. So first it needs to identify the access point within its range, then it sends associate request frame to that access point, then it accepts it, and then the access point gives a reply in form of associate reply frame. So once the reply comes from the access point, communication takes place, and based on that, sender prepares a frame to send it to the destination. Then there are mainly 3 protocols incorporated in security of the Wi-Fi. First one is a WEP, stands for Wired Equivalent Privacy. Second is a Wi-Fi Protected Access, that is WPA. Wi-Fi Protected Access 2, which is WPA2. So WEP is basically designed to provide authentication or access control, data integrity and confidentiality, but it failed on all 3 counts. So WPA was intended to fix the shortcomings of a WEP without requiring new wireless network cards. But WPA is not perfect. It too is susceptible to attacks on its cryptographic algorithms. So in the last Wi-Fi Protected Access 2, all the deficiencies in WEP have been addressed in the IEEE 802.11i, which is implemented in WPA2. So we are going to see IEEE 802.11i in detail, how it is going to provide or how it is going to overcome all the 3 shortcomings of a WEP. That is how to provide authentication, how to provide data integrity, and how to provide confidentiality. So first we'll see authentication, in which we are going to see pre-WEP authentication, what are the main drawbacks of it, authentication in a WEP, authentication and key agreement in 802.11. So in the pre-WEP authentication, the main drawbacks are an attacker could easily sneak the value of SSID from frames such as the beacon or a probe response and then use it for authentication. So here attacker can easily steal the value of a SSID from the frames, and the same SSID can be used it for the authentication. Another approach was to restrict admission to the WLAN by MAC address. So in this, the AP would maintain a list of MAC addresses of stations permitted to join the WLAN. Valid MAC addresses could be obtained by sniffing the wireless medium. The attacker could then modify its network card to spoof a valid MAC address. So neither of these approaches are truly secure. So here in the second approach, what exactly the attacker does is that it tries to sneak the MAC address or valid MAC address from the wireless medium. Once the attacker gets a valid MAC address, the attacker modify his network card with that valid MAC address and then try to have a communication, which in this case it's a valid communication. So in WEP, the station authenticates itself to the access point using a challenge response protocol. So in the WEP, the authentication takes place by using this protocol called as a challenge response protocol. Basically, the access point generates a challenge, a nonce we call it as, and sends it to the station. The station encrypts the challenge and sends it back to the access point. The stream cipher, that is RC4, is used for encryption. The response from the station is that the station computes a key stream, which is a function of a 40-bit shared secret key yes and a 24-bit initialization vector, that is IB4. That is 24-bit initialization vector. The challenge is then XORed with the key stream to create the response. So here is response is equal to challenge, which is XORed with a key stream, and the input to the key stream is nothing but a 40-bit shared secret key and a 24-bit initialization vector. The response together with the initialization vector is sent by the station to the access point. The shared secret yes is common to all the stations authorized to use the WLAN. So this is the protocol used in the web to have the communication and to provide the authentication. But the drawback of this protocol is that by eavesdropping on several challenge response pairs between the access point and the various stations, an attacker could launch a dictionary attack and eventually obtain the value of a yes. Once the attacker knows the value of a yes, he may easily get the challenge, that is nonce, which is generated by the station, and by making use of that one, it can XOR with the key stream with the initialization vector, and he may easily get the response. So authentication and key agreement it in 802.11. So 802.11i uses IEEE 802.1x, a protocol that supports authentication at the link layer. So there are main three entities involved in this protocol. One is a supplicant, nothing but the wireless station; authenticator, nothing but the access point in our case; and the authentication server. The different authentication mechanisms and message types are defined by the Extensible Authentication Protocol, EAP, standardized by Internet Engineering Task Force, that is IETF. EAP is not really an authentication protocol, but rather a framework upon which various authentication protocols can be supported. EAP exchanges are mostly comprised of requests and responses. For example, one party requests the ID of another party. The latter responds with its username or email address. EAP also defines messages that may contain challenges and responses used in authentication protocols. The access point broadcasts its security capabilities in the beacon or probe response frames. The station uses the associate request frame to communicate its security capabilities. 802.11i authentication takes place after the station associates with an access point. So now we'll see IEEE 802.11i in detail. The generic authentication messages in IEEE 802.11i is shown in the next figure. The protocol which is used between the station and the access point is a EAP, but that used between the access point and the authentication server depends upon the specifics. For example, the authentication server is often a radius server which uses its own message types and formats. So the radius server is a client server protocol used for authentication, authorization and accounting. So which already we have seen in the introduction part. Now here exactly the communication between station, access point and authentication server. So here are the main authentication methods supported by EAP, includes the 4 methods. First one is the EAP MD5, EAP TLS, EAP TTLS, EAP PAP. So we'll see these methods in detail one by one. So first one is the EAP MD5. This is the most basic of the EAP authentication methods. Here, the authentication server challenges the station to transmit the MD5 hash of the user passwords. The station prompts the user to type his or her password. It then computes the hash of the password and sends this across. This method is insecure since an attacker could eavesdrop on such a message exchange and then replay the hashed password, thus impersonating the owner of the password. Also, this method does not support the authentication of the access point to the station. So in the second method, that is EAP TLS, that is transport layer security, is based on the SSL TLS protocol. Most secure and provides mutual authentication and agreement on a master session key. It requires the access point as well as the user to have digital certificates. It is relatively straightforward to equip each access point with a digital certificate and a corresponding private key, but extending the via to each user of the WLAN may not be feasible. So the third one is a EAP TTLS, which is EAP tunneled transport layer security, requires a certificate only at the access point end. The access point authenticates itself to the station and both sides construct a secure tunnel between themselves. Over this secure channel, the station authenticates itself to the access point. The station could transmit attribute value pairs such as username is equal to Akshay, password is equal to this, then protected EAP. So the fourth one is a protected EAP. It is proposed by Microsoft, Cisco and RSA Security. It is similar to EAP TTLS. So in this, the secure channel is used to start a second EAP exchange wherein the station authenticates itself to the authentication server. So next one is a key hierarchy. There are two types of keys which are used in the WLAN. The first one are the pairwise keys and the second one we call it as a group key. The pairwise keys are used to protect traffic between the station and an access point. The second type of key is the group key, which is intended to protect broadcast or multicast traffic between an access point and multiple stations. The hierarchy of 802.11i keys are: the root of the key hierarchy is a pairwise master key. Then this is obtained in one of the two ways. The station and the authentication server may agree on a master session key as part of a authentication procedure. The authentication server communicates this key with the access point. The access point and the station then derives the pairwise master key from this master session key. This is a one way, or in another way, an alternative to computing a fresh pairwise master key for each session is the pre-shared key, which is used as a pairwise master key. Now, if you see this key hierarchy, it's like this. So here it's a pairwise master key. So this pairwise master key can be obtained by using two ways. Either we can use master session key, and by using that master session key we can go for deriving the pairwise master key, or else pre-shared key can be used it as a pairwise master key. So from this pairwise master key we are going to derive PTK and then TK, CK and KEK. So what are these? We'll see. So pairwise transient key. The 256-bit pairwise master key is used to derive a 348-bit pairwise transient key. The pairwise transient key is a pseudo-random function of the PMK, then the two nonces which are chosen by the access point and the station and their MAC addresses. So if you give these as an input to the pseudo-random function, then it is going to derive you a 348-bit pairwise transient key. Then from this 384-bit pairwise transient key, we are going to extract three 128-bit chunks for the following purpose. The first key is a temporal key, which is used for both encryption and integrity protection of data between the access point and the station. Second one is a K confirmation key, which is KCK. Integrity protection is supported by a MAC computed as a function of the message and the KCK. Then key encryption key, which is used to encrypt the message containing the group key. Then it's a four-way handshake. The main goals of the four-way handshakes are to derive the pairwise transient key from the pairwise master key, verify the cipher suits communicated in the beacon and associate request frames, communicate the group keys from the access points to the station. So here is a figure of a four-way handshake protocol, which is used in a 802.11i. So the communication takes place between station and the access point. So first, station chooses one fresh nonce, sends it to the access point. Then it prepares a cipher suit, and then it sends a reply. Then third message is prepared from the access point to the station, and fourth is from station to access point. So what are these four message exchange takes place? We'll see in detail. So the first message, the access point sends a nonce, that is NA, to the station. So in the second message, the station chooses a nonce NS, computes the PTK as follows. So PTK is a pseudo random function of, that is pairwise master key, the two nonces chosen from the access point and the station, that is NA and NS, and the MAC addresses of the access point and MAC address of the station. So from this PTK is derived. Then whatever the two nonces are used in this function, it helps to prevent the replay attack. So once you apply this, once you get the PTK, from these we are going to derive, or we are going to extract three 128-bit keys. One is a TK, that is temporal key, KCK, that is key confirmation key, and third one is a KEK, that is key encryption key. The station sends nonce, cipher suit, and uses KCK to compute the message integrity check. So in the message 3, on receiving the message 2, access point computes the PTK from the above expression used by the station. Access point verifies the integrity and source of message 2 using the key KCK. Message 3 contains group transient key. This is the key used by the AP and all stations to integrate, protect, multicast and broadcast. So in the message 4, this is an acknowledgement from the station that it has received the previous messages without error. It is a signal to the access point that henceforth all messages will be integrity protected and encrypted with the TK. So the last point of this chapter is providing a confidentiality and integrity. So for this we are going to see data protection in web, then data protection in TKIP and CCMP. So the data protection in web. Web was designed to provide message confidentiality, integrity and access control, but it failed on all three accounts. So in this section, we show how plain text can be recovered and messages can be modified due to flawed design decisions in web. There are many lessons to be learned from web, the most important being how not to design protocols for security. So web encryption and integrity checking. Web uses the stream cipher, that is RC4, for encrypting the messages. It generates a pseudo-random key stream KS, which is a function of a static secret shared between the two communicating parties. In order to have KS vary from message to message, a random per message initialization vector is also used to generate KS. Early implementation of web used a 40-bit secret key S, which is concatenated with a 24-bit initialization vector to create a 64-bit key. KS is XORed with a plain text to obtain the ciphertext. So it is C is equal to P XORed with S comma initialization vector, that is KS. So here is a web frame. So when a sender prepares a frame so as to send it to the receiver, so it is going to have a plain text which is in an encrypted format. So that plain text is first XORed with the initialization vector, which is a 24-bit. Then the CRC, that is to check the message integrity. So from the plain text, we are going to see this. We are going to take a summary of the message, for which we are going to apply the hash function so as to check the message integrity. So now suppose the plain text is need to be recovered, then it has to be performed, that is ciphertext XORed with the KS S comma initialization vector. So what does it mean? That if you know the value of a ciphertext, if you know the value of a secret key, if you know the value of an initialization vector, then the plain text can be easily recovered. So in this, the main problem is known plain text attack. The first problem with web is the possibility of key stream reuse. Since the initialization vector is a 24 bits in length, there are only 24 distinct key streams that could be constructed given a secret yes. Suppose an attacker finds two frames which were encrypted using the same initialization vector, then it gets two ciphertexts. One is a C, another is a C dash. Let the corresponding plain text be P and a P dash. So P XORed with P dash is equal to C XORed with C dash. Nothing but you can get the value of a P dash equal to P XORed with ciphertext XORed with the C dash. So another type of a attack which can happen here is a message modification. Consider an attacker who wishes to modify a message sent by a legitimate user. Let the sender's plain text be M1 and M2, where M1, F and M2 are each binary strings. The attacker wishes to substitute the substring F with another substring F dash, so that a decrypted message seen by the receiver is M1 F dash M2 instead of M1 F M2. The attacker does not need to know the values of M1 and M2. However, we assume that he knows F and F dash. Ideally, the message integrity check should detect any modification to an existing message. Can the attacker modify the message in such a way that the modification is undetected at the receiver end? For the above plain text, the ciphertext computed by the sender is like this. That is CT is equal to M1 F M2 concatenated with CRC M1 F M2 XORed with KS. The attacker intercepts the ciphertext and performs the following operation. He first constructs the string, then he computes the CRC on this string like this. He finally XORs the original ciphertext with this. The last step follows from the fact that CRC is a linear operation, that is CRC M1 XORed with M2 is equal to CRC M1 XORed with CRC M2. The receiver on decrypting the ciphertext obtains M1 F dash M2, which is concatenated with CRC M1 F dash M2. So in this way, the attacker can modify the message by replacing the substring F with a F dash. So to overcome this one, we are going to see the data protection in TKIP and CCMP, that is two-phase key mixing in TKIP. So here exactly is a figure. So there are two phases we are going to use. One is a PRF1 phase 1 and PRF2 phase 2. So for the PRF1 phase 1, the input is temporal key, which is a 128-bit, sender's MAC address, which is a 48-bit, then 4 MS bytes of sequence counter, which is a 32-bit. So this is the input. The output of the phase 1 is a 80-bit data, which is the input to the next page. Along with this 80-bit input, 16-bit to LS, that is least significant bytes of a sequence counter. So if you apply these two input to the phase 2, we'll be getting a 104-bit data, and 24-bit from the sequence counter will be using it, which we will concatenate together by using RC4 per frame key. Now this we are going to use it as a key for protecting the data. So this TKIP stands for Temporal Key Integrity Protocol, which is a 128-bit. The TKIP generates a random and different encryption key for each frame sent. It employs a process called two-phase key mixing. The input to this process are the 128-bit temporal key computed as part of the 4-way handshake, the sender's MAC address, and the 4 most significant bytes of a 48-bit frame sequence counter. The randomizing capability of the key mixing function and the large size of the key space virtually guarantee that key stream collisions never occur. Thus, known-plane attacks that could be successfully launched on web have no chance of success with TKIP, because here, as we are going to use two phases which are mixed with each other, and we are going to use a large key size to get the key, a fresh key every time to have a communication. So it is the sequence counter is incremented for each frame sent. It is also carried in the header of each frame. This helps protect the receiver from the replay attacks. So as we have seen the two phases which are used in RC4 key. So already we have seen this, what exactly we have applied to the input to the program, and based on that what we have got the output. So the last one is a CBC MAC protocol, that is CCMP. So here in this CCMP, if you see a figure, we have applied the initialization vector along with the temporal key which is encrypted. The output of the first step is an input to the next one, which is XORed with AAD1, again encrypted by using the same temporal key. The output of that one, again it is XORed with AAD2, encrypted with a temporal key again. Like that the chain continues. So we'll see the explanation of this figure. So the implementation of 802.11i that uses AES is referred to as WPA2. Its technical name is counter mode with CBC MAC protocol. In CCMM terminology, this count is referred as packet number. The count is maintained at both sender and receiver ends. The PN is also included in a special CCMP header field in a CCMP frame. The packet number is incremented by the sender after each frame is sent. Upon receipt of a fresh frame in that session, the receiver compares the value of a packet number in the CCM header versus the value stored by it. If the value is less than the stored value, the frame is likely to be a replayed frame and hence is discarded. The first task in preparing a frame for transmission is to compute the message integrity check. Is computed by using AES in cipher block chaining mode with block size 128 bits. The key for performing encryption in each stage of a figure shown is a temporal key. The initialization vector for the MIC computation is a nonce, which includes the 48-bit packet number. The second and the third blocks used in the MIC computation are specific fields in the frame header such as MAC addresses, sequence control, and frame types. Next, the blocks in the frame data are sequentially processed, resulting in an 8-byte MIC. The next step is the encryption. The frame data and the MIC are concatenated and then encrypted by using advanced encryption standard in counter mode. Let n be the total number of blocks. in the frame body plus MIC. The procedure for encrypting the ith block is AI equal to ETK Pn plus I into J. Hence, Pn is a packet number and J is a constant known to both sender and receiver. Compute ith block of a ciphertext. Here, Pi is the ith block of a plain text. The frame now includes the two new fields, CCMP header and the MIC. Upon receipt of the frame, the receiver reverses the operation performed by the sender. It performs the decryption followed by MIC verification. Now, as you see, it's a very complex task to compute the MIC, then to perform the encryption. There is no chance for attacker to decrypt the message even though it gets the ciphertext. So this is what exactly the IEEE wireless LAN network security.